Drummer's March, The Trials of Elias Chase. Act 1, The Farm and the Fife. The Chase farm sat quiet in the folds of the Berkshires, not far from the road to Albany. A hard patch of earth, sown more by sweat than by seed, where the wind sang low through birches and stone walls held more moss than mortar. Elias Chase, 15, had never seen the ocean, nor a redcoat in the flesh. But he knew loss. And he knew silence. His brother Jonah had gone to Bunker Hill with the Massachusetts militia. He hadn't come back. All they received was a tattered fife and the rumor of a good death. Elias's father said nothing for months afterward. Just plowed. Cut. Stacked wood like it would make the grief less hollow. His mother wept in secret, then prayed louder than before. His sister Ruth grew older too fast, her hands blistered and browned by summer. Elias? He waited. Waited for his own grief to ripen. Waited for the drumbeats that might call him too. They came one July morning. A rider, dust-covered, blue coat threadbare, delivered a broadside to the tavern wall in nearby Egremont. The British had taken New York City. Washington was retreating across New Jersey. The cause, he said, needed young men. Elias was smaller than most men, but he was fast. He could shoot. He could read. And more than that, he could play a tune that made you stand straighter. So he packed the fife, a loaf of bread, a small Bible, and a linen shirt. Told no one but Ruth. She cried, gave him a needle and thread, and whispered, "Don't come home with silence." He joined a local column bound for Peekskill, a ragged bunch with no matching coats, but a fire in their bones. They drilled in fields when it wasn't raining. They sang songs between marches. And at night, Elias played his fife until the older boys stopped grumbling and listened. The captain, a veteran of Quebec, watched Elias carefully. One morning, he approached and said, "You don't look like much, but your music's clear. You'll march with the Signal Corps. Can you keep time and musket fire?" Elias said yes. He didn't know. By autumn, they were at the edge of the real war. Skirmishes erupted in hills near White Plains. Bodies came back cold and blackened, carried on improvised litters. Elias saw his first real battle from behind a logged wall near Tarrytown. He watched men he'd marched with vanish in smoke. He played through it all, notes trembling but true. The officers heard. So did a man named Caleb Brewster, a courier for the Continental Army's Secret Service. Brewster came to him 2 nights later, after supper. He asked if Elias could ride. If he could remember a message without writing it. If he'd ever lied to a man's face. Elias nodded, slowly. Brewster grinned. "You're small. Quick. You've got eyes like a hawk and a tune that turns heads. I've got a task that's worth 10 regiments and not 1 musket. You up for it?" Elias didn't speak. He just packed. That was the last he saw of the Chase farm for nearly 3 years. Act 2, Messages in the Mist. Elias rode with Caleb Brewster in silence for the first day, the wind tugging at his sleeves, the Hudson glinting silver beside them. The boy didn't ask where they were going. Caleb didn't offer. That was part of the test. They camped in a pine hollow the first night. Brewster passed Elias a hard biscuit and pointed at the stars. "Some people see constellations. I see routes. Rivers. Hideouts. You're not in the infantry anymore, lad. You're in the invisible army now." By dawn, Elias learned the first rules of a courier. Say nothing. Ride fast. Trust no one. And never, ever carry ink and paper if you could help it. His missions were short at first, across narrow valleys, between farmhouses with shuttered windows and passwords sewn into quilting patterns. His fife stayed quiet now, stashed beneath the saddle. The silence of this new war was its armor. He began to meet others in the shadows. A cobbler in Danbury who spoke only in Bible verses. A freedman named Isaac who signaled danger by how he hung his laundry. A girl in her teens, identical in age to Elias, who passed coded reports through baskets of apples. Her name was Molly, but she insisted on Wren. They were the eyes and ears of the American cause. They were the culprit, though no one used the name out loud. One cold morning in February, Elias was handed a sealed scrap of parchment by Brewster and told to ride south toward enemy lines. The message was meant for someone in New York, a man deep within the British command. Elias's route took him through Norwalk, into Westchester, then past British pickets along the Bronx River. He dressed as a farm boy, a thief, once even as a chimney sweep. At the edge of the city, the fog rolled in. He crossed through it on foot, into the British-held streets, slipping between patrols, into the yard of a tailor's shop. There, a man in a red coat waited, trimming candlewicks. The man spoke low. His voice held no accent. "Message?" Elias nodded, reached into his boot, produced the scrap. The man read it in seconds, then lit it with the wick and let it burn. "Tell Brewster they plan to move on West Point before the thaw. And tell him to be careful. There's talk of a traitor." Elias returned by night, mud-slick, bone-weary, and half-starved. But alive. And different. He no longer feared death, not in the abstract. What he feared now was failure. Because this was a war without bugles, without banners. It was a war of silences, betrayals, and unseen sacrifice. When he returned to camp, Wren was waiting. She handed him a scrap of cloth, a handkerchief stitched with a symbol he now recognized, the cipher of the ring. "You're one of us now," she said. "Not a drummer. A drumbeat." He didn't understand at first. But he'd learn. Soon. Act 3, The Traitor's Signal. The thaw came early that spring. Snowmelt swelled the creeks and turned roads into rivers. British troops stirred from their winter quarters in New York, while whispers grew louder in the hills, whispers of betrayal, whispers of treason, whispers of a name. Benedict Arnold. Elias had never met the man, but soldiers spoke of him with reverence. The hero of Saratoga. The stormer of Quebec. Now posted at West Point, the most strategic fortress on the Hudson. And yet, the culprit was restless. Wren passed Elias a coded sheet on a Monday. He read it twice, then stared at the trees, letting the wind clear his thoughts. "The eagle intends to trade its nest," the cipher read. "Beware the serpent with silver tongue." Brewster had the message decrypted within hours. Arnold was planning to surrender West Point to the British. The cost? £50,000. And a general's commission in the redcoat ranks. Elias's next mission was different. He was to shadow a courier, a man named John Andre, an officer young, polished, and deadly clever. Andre had met with Arnold in secret. The ring knew the rendezvous location, Haverstraw, but needed eyes on the ground. Elias volunteered. He followed Andre from the shadows. Watched him disembark from a British sloop under flag of truce. Watched him walk into the woods with a bundle of papers hidden in his boot. Elias crept along the river path behind him. No fife now. No music. Just breath and branches. Hours passed. Then a confrontation. Andre, traveling back to British lines in disguise, was stopped near Tarrytown by 3 American militiamen, volunteers, ragged and hungry. They searched him. Found the documents. Andre offered them gold. They refused. When word reached Washington, the capital trembled. Arnold fled to the British. Andre was tried and hanged as a spy. But the fortress was saved. Because Elias Chase had followed quietly. Watched. Reported. He hadn't fired a shot. But his message struck truer than any bullet. The work didn't stop. The British grew bolder in their efforts to unmask the culprit ring. Taverns turned into traps. Coded notes were intercepted. Names began to disappear, Wren among them. One day, she was simply gone. Brewster told Elias nothing. Elias didn't ask. He knew better now. In this part of the war, knowing too much got people killed. One evening, after a long rain, Elias sat alone by a creek. He pulled out his fife. Played a single tune, Jonah's favorite, soft and slow. Not for the enemy. Not for a march. But for the ghosts. For Wren. For the silence. Act 4. Beneath the hanging tree. The war dragged into its 6th bloody year. The boy who had once marched to drumbeats now moved like a shadow through the backroads of New Jersey, his face leaner, eyes darker. His name had changed, too, at least in the circles that mattered. Now they called him Hollow. For how empty he seemed. For how much he had seen. West Point held. But barely. Arnold's treachery rattled the rebel ranks. The British redoubled their efforts to crack the rebel codes, turning their gaze toward the ordinary. Tavern keepers. Seamstresses. Teenage boys with calloused hands and unreadable eyes. Elias was sent to Monmouth County on a tip. A network of loyalists was feeding troop movements to the Crown from a cider press near Colt's Neck. Brewster said only this: "Trust no one but the silence." Elias found the press. And the betrayal. The man in charge was a minister. He offered Elias a place at the table. Wine. Bread. A warm hearth. He said the cause of the king was the only path to peace. Elias said nothing. Just watched. And listened. Then, on the 3rd night, when the man stepped away to write a message in cipher, Elias slipped behind him and replaced the ink with lemon juice. Invisible. Reversible. Harmless at first glance. Then he lit the parchment with a candle. The words glowed. "Washington rides north. Strike the supply wagons." He rode back at a gallop. Within a day, the cider press burned to the ground. No gunfire. No executions. Just silence, and cinders, and one less hand feeding the serpent. Back in camp, he met a stranger. A woman in Quaker gray. Middle-aged. Eyes like polished stones. Her name was Lydia Dara. She had smuggled news from Philadelphia under the noses of British generals by baking them into loaves of bread and sewing them into hems. Now she came with a message of her own. "There's a hanging scheduled in Trenton. A young courier. Caught with a cipher. Not one of ours, but they'll use him to flush out the rest." Elias asked her name. "They call me Dusk," she said. "Because I come before the dark." Elias made for Trenton under cover of rain. He watched from a rooftop as a teenage boy stood beneath the hanging tree, rope around his neck, blindfolded. The boy was no more than 14. He was singing. It was a hymn Elias knew. "O death, where is thy sting?" Elias moved before the prayer finished. He didn't shoot. He didn't shout. He set fire to the building across from the gallows. And when the guards ran, he dropped from the rooftop, cut the rope, and fled into the alley with the boy in his arms. They didn't stop running for 2 days. The boy's name was Samuel. He'd been recruited by a baker's son in Allentown. His first message had been intercepted. They tortured him. Not for the information, but for the theater. For the lesson. Now the lesson was reversed. The British no longer owned fear. Brewster said nothing when Elias returned. Just handed him a dry coat and a tin cup. "Hollow," he said. "You've done enough. Time you went home." Elias didn't answer. He hadn't had a home in years. But he looked north. Toward Fishkill. Toward Jonah's grave. And for the first time in months, he felt the weight of the fife in his satchel. Act 5, Valley of Smoke. Fishkill was quiet. Elias hadn't returned in nearly 3 years, but the mountains still wore the same green cloak. The creek behind his father's field still murmured like it remembered his name. Only the barn was different, leaning now, sun-bleached and bowed. And his father was gone. buried under a plain stone carved by men Elias didn't know. Joseph Chase, 1729 to 1780. Farmer. Father. Nothing else. No flag. No cause. Just earth. Elias slept in the loft that night, alone with the mice and the moonlight. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. But he placed the fife at the foot of the ladder like an offering. A keepsake from a dead brother. A burden from a living one. Word spread through the Hudson Valley like the coming frost. Cornwallis had moved south. Washington was preparing for a final strike. French troops were marching to meet him. Yorktown would be the endgame. But up north, the war flickered on, sickly and strange. Gangs of deserters now roamed the Catskills, wearing the coats of both armies and the loyalties of none. They raided farms, burned stores, and sold intelligence to the highest bidder. One of them had taken up near Newburgh. A man with a burned scar across his jaw. A Hessian turncoat. A killer named Kruger. Elias was sent to find him. He rode south with 3 others, Dusk, a blacksmith turned spy named Matthias, and a Mohican scout called Rook. Rook said little, but he knew the woods like breath. He could read tracks like scripture. And he'd once been captured by Kruger's men. "They cut my tongue," he said softly, pointing to the scar beneath his chin. "But I still speak with fire." They found Kruger's camp in a shale valley, thick with smoke and slaughtered livestock. Dozens of refugees, families, widows, children, had been held hostage for food and shelter. Elias and the others moved in at dusk. There was no plan. No orders. Just resolve. They lit the camp stores ablaze with oil-soaked torches. Rook took the left flank, slitting throats like shadows. Matthias covered the escape route with a blacksmith's hammer and a flintlock. Elias went for Kruger. They met near the coals. Kruger, hulking and red-eyed, swung a saber made from a broken scythe. Elias had only a knife and a fife tucked in his coat. He dropped the blade, pulled the fife, and blew a single piercing note. The refugees heard it. And they moved. One woman slammed a pan into Kruger's leg. Another bit his arm. A boy, no older than Elias, had been at Bunker Hill, jammed a stick between his ribs. Elias struck his temple with the fife. Kruger dropped. Hard. It was over in less than 15 minutes. The hostages ran. Rook vanished into the trees. Dusk rode north with the wounded. Matthias buried the bodies without asking names. Elias sat beside the fire pit. Blood on his sleeves. Ash in his mouth. He didn't feel victorious. He felt hollow again. But safer than before. Back in camp, Brewster met him with a packet. A new cipher. A new assignment. Elias burned it. "I'm done," he said. Brewster nodded. Didn't press. Didn't need to. The ring had lost many. But the war was ending. And Elias had done more than most. He walked away from camp before dawn. No horse. No fife. Just footsteps and mist. He walked until his legs shook. Until the sun cleared the fog. Until he found a riverbank and sat alone, letting the earth cool his skin. And when he finally stood, he looked south. Toward Yorktown. Toward whatever came next. Act 6, when the drum falls silent. The war was ending. But its echoes would last lifetimes. Elias returned to a world that no longer recognized him. The fields of Fishkill were greener, yes, but the soil was stained with memory. He walked through the town square where once a militia had drilled. Children played beneath a faded flag. Old men argued quietly in taverns about taxes and liberty. He was a stranger in the place he once called home. His mother had passed the previous winter, leaving the house empty but for memories and the faint smell of rosemary. His sister Ruth was married and gone to a neighboring county. His father's grave had been visited by strangers, soldiers and townsfolk alike, but none knew his story. Elias sat on the porch, his fingers wrapped around the fife. He lifted it slowly to his lips and played the tune Jonah had taught him. The notes drifted over the valley, carried on a soft spring breeze. He thought of the friends lost, Wren, Dusk, Rook, Matthias. Their faces haunted his dreams, their sacrifices etched in the shadows of the forest. He thought of the boy he had saved beneath the hanging tree, the messages whispered in the mist, the fires that lit the way in the darkest nights. And he thought of the country being born, fragile, raw, and aching. The war was over. But the march of freedom was just beginning. Elias folded the fife and placed it carefully in a wooden box. He took a deep breath and stepped into the future.